If you just take a look at where society is right now, what you were talking about earlier with like the natural cycles and with all of this other, like the non-hormonal birth control, this is clearly a sign that the church has been preserving something that the world is hungry for right now. We cannot separate out the natural functions of the body from the person themselves. It's wrapped up in all of these things. It's not a standalone issue that you can say, okay, I'll take some of these things and just not that one, because they are connected. There's a lot of people who think that like, this is unrealistic, this is impossible. And I'm like, okay, I'm sorry, but like holiness is demanding. I don't think that we're slaves to our base desires that way. So I would say if anybody thinks that like NFP is just unrealistic in that respect, like, yeah, it's hard, but virtue is hard. Holiness is hard. The thing is, through grace, it's achievable.
Welcome to the Exposing Catholics show, where we expose the lives, interactions, and stories of Catholics. Our guest today is Christina Valenzuela. Welcome on.
Thank you. You got that pronunciation perfect. That's
Heck yeah. So can you give a little bit of background of who you are and what you do?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, just maybe starting with my business. So I run a business called Pearl and Thistle, where I do what I like to call lifelong body literacy education for Catholics. So it began with natural family planning instruction over a decade ago at this point. And then it's since expanded to include kind of puberty and cycle education for girls before they start their first period, courses for perimenopause, charting instructions for teens and for single women who want to learn how to chart their cycles just for health, not for fertility. And then I also do work with dioceses and parishes to try and bring these programs and this information to their communities. So it's kind of a big passion project for sure, but I'm very excited to share more about that with you all today.
Absolutely. And can you dive in? What exactly is NFP?
Oh, great question. So natural family planning is a big umbrella term for any method that you would use to chart what we call biomarkers for ovulation within a woman's cycle. And so the techniques for natural family planning can be used basically to just identify fertility within a cycle, natural rhythms of fertility when couples are likely to conceive. So it can be helpful for couples who are really trying to conceive, and it can be helpful for couples who would need to postpone or avoid pregnancy. And then just the basic information that you get from cycle charting with these biomarkers can also be hugely impactful for understanding kind of a woman's overall health. So natural family planning is the term that the church has kind of put forward. And actually, I believe the term natural family planning was put forward initially by the World Health Organization. So it's not like a religious term. But what it means is that we're keeping the natural functions of both partners' bodies intact, right? Women maintain their natural ability to conceive or not conceive at various parts in our cycle. And likewise, men, achieve their natural fertility with each act of intercourse.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So for people that have never heard of NFP, they're like, that just doesn't make any sense. There's no way that it works as well as contraception. Can you explain kind of how it works?
Yeah. So basically, let's say, if we're comparing contraception, right, we're talking about situations where we're going to be trying to avoid pregnancy. And so what couples do is with the knowledge that they gain about their fertility, they can make informed choices about when they would be timing intercourse relative to potential fertility within their cycle. And so if you're trying to avoid pregnancy, you would avoid having intercourse or genital contact during the fertile window that's identified by your method. And then if you're trying to conceive, you would try to have intercourse within that identified fertile window. And so when we look at kind of comparing efficacy rates, I mean, this gets into really, really muddy waters about differences between perfect and typical use and kind of how that's measured, the quality of studies. But basically what we can say is that modern science-based methods of natural family planning, which I think would be kind of a different category conceptually than something like the rhythm method. So modern science-based methods that look at ovulation within the cycle can be very robust. And if you're comparing with other forms of contraception, can be very, very effective, if not equally or more so effective than some other forms.
Can you explain some of the different types of methods of NFP?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So at NFP, right, we have lots of different biomarkers that we can look at for ovulation within a woman's cycle. So we can look at cervical fluid secretions. We can look at basal body temperature, which is kind of resting temperature or waking temperature. And then now we also have at-home hormonal monitoring options. So different categories of methods will work with these different biomarkers in various combinations or according to different researched criteria. So the first category of method would be something that's called an ovulation method or a cervical mucus method, and that really only looks at cervical secretions, and that's it. So that would be something like Billings or Creighton. Those are kind of the two big ones that we have in the US. And then you could look at methods that will combine cervical secretions with temperature. Those are called symptothermal methods. So couple-to-couple league, Sensiplan, SymptoPro, these sorts of methods. And then the last category, hormone monitoring, we'll sometimes look at cervical fluid and basal body temperature as well, but we'll always have a component where we're looking at urinary metabolites of hormones. So tracking excretions of different hormones in urine with test sticks throughout the cycle. So examples of that would be the Marquette method, FEM, and then the method that I teach, Boston Crosscheck, is also considered a hormone method.
I've never heard of that last one. We do the Marquette method, but we're actually switching to a symptothermal method. It's a long story, but that we just have learned that's probably going to work best for us and something that we're trying out. But why would someone even want to do NFP? You have to abstain from having sex during your fertile window. That's just a pain. Why would anyone want to do that instead of just using contraception and having sex whenever?
I feel like I'm going to tell you, these are all great questions. I'm going to start with that. So, it depends on, there are lots of different motivations, I would say. For some people, the simple fact that the church teaches that this is the moral means for postponing pregnancy is enough. People say, you know what, I trust the church's judgment on this. This has been a clear and consistent teaching for as long as we can look back and see. And so for me, that argument is enough. Does that make it easy? No, that doesn't make it easy at all. But for somebody who really wants to be motivated to follow church teaching, then that sort of moral argument may be sufficient. But I think there's mounting evidence, and I will be very happy to see kind of what this trajectory is in the next 5 to 10 years. But I think there's mounting evidence that doctors are finally coming around to understanding that shutting off a woman's entire reproductive system for the sake of postponing pregnancy is actually not healthy for a woman. Our bodies have been designed to function in a certain way, and when we are depriving women of their natural rhythms of hormones, we're actually doing a big disservice to women in many regards. And so I think that there are more people who are kind of coming to this even from the health standpoint. Because just to back up a little bit, if you're put on a hormonal birth control, it's actually overriding your natural hormone rhythms and replacing them with something synthetic. Okay. Mm-hmm. So the bleeds that you have, if you're taking a birth control pill or on the patch or anything, the bleeds that you're having are not real periods. A real period is actually preceded by ovulation, and it's this cascade of hormonal events, all of which that have very important effects on a woman's total health and reflect a woman's total health to a certain extent. And so what birth control does is to kind of mask and override that natural rhythm, replacing it with something fake. And so I think we're coming to the conclusion that maybe this isn't a great thing to do. So I would say for people who are not necessarily swayed by the moral argument, I think that there's a significant argument to be made that this is actually better and safer for long-term women's health to consider.
We've got something special for all our Catholic organizations. Now, before you skip past this part, it's not an ad. It's more like an incredible opportunity to take your digital presence to the next level. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret here. Something only for our podcast listeners. We, DM Productions, have a 2-day Catholic social media makeover course. It's an online course specifically made for Catholic organizations. It will take your social media to the next level. And we make it easier than ever with our step-by-step video walkthroughs, cheat sheets, customizable templates, and more. Catholic organizations, Let's start creating the quality and results that secular businesses have, but with the depth and beauty of Catholicism. Oh, and did I mention the price? $700. But remember I said I was going to let you in on a little secret? Use code DMPodcast to get it completely free. No credit card required. Just pop that code in and you're all set. Head over to www.dm.productions/social media makeover or click the link in the description. Now back to the show.
And can you explain some of like the effects that contraceptions and specifically like the pill or hormonal birth control can have on a woman's body?
I mean, this is a little bit outside my area of expertise, honestly, and it definitely varies based on whether you're doing a combined hormonal contraceptive or whether you're doing a progestin-only contraceptive. But what I can tell you is that when we do have our natural rhythms of hormones, what we're coming to understand is that this is a really healthy way for our body to kind of make long-term health deposits for something like cardiovascular health, with bone health, with mental health, things like that. The way that our hormones function throughout a woman's body are designed so that at certain parts in our cycle, we can be naturally more receptive to the uptake of certain minerals and things like that. We can understand that our bodies are better. This gets a little into like cycle syncing, but that our bodies are better at certain types of exercise, that long-term bone and joint and muscle health can actually be maintained if we pay attention to these natural rhythms of cycles. I'm not really somebody who gets into the horrible side effects of birth control, because I think from a moral standpoint, they don't even matter, right? If the moral argument is that the thing that we're preserving is the natural function of our body, then even if birth control had zero negative side effects, the church would still be against it, right? Yeah. For the pure reason that it disrupts a woman's system. So I would say if you're interested in learning more about that, you might want to turn to organizations like Natural Womanhood. For physicians in particular, the organization FACTS, factsaboutfertility.org, is really, really powerful on this. So I think that there's, I mean, we can list kind of things like increased risk of certain cancers or increased risk of blood clots, or kind of all these things that are coming to the fore now. But I think that those are a little tangential from specifically the work that I do.
Mm-hmm. Is there any like effects that NFP has on a woman's body negatively compared to like contraception in general?
On the woman's body? No. I mean, in particular, in very, very specific medical cases where a woman really does have a reproductive disorder, sometimes there are cases where very powerful synthetic hormones may be kind of the best option that we currently have for medical treatment, and that's not ideal. But I don't want women to be scared into thinking that, like, if I really have a serious medical condition, like I can't take what my doctor is offering me. That's a whole other side component. Mm-hmm. But like for the most part, unless you have a very, very serious underlying condition, keeping our natural cycles intact is a really healthy way to make sure that what's called our HPO axis, our hypothalamus, our pituitary glands, and our ovaries, it's kind of this main communication channel between our brain and our ovaries, our reproductive system, is functioning. And this has an impact on thyroid health. This has an impact on all sorts of other things throughout the body. So I would say from a physical standpoint, natural family planning, just on the whole, is so much healthier for a woman's body. There is a mental toll. There is something to be said about that. I don't want to neglect the fact that natural family planning can seem like a burden, like a mental burden, in a way that a quick and easy contraceptive patch may not. Yeah. So, that's another conversation, but there is that to consider. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I just think that there's so many women that are like tired of like just not understanding what's going on in their body, and they want to feel healthy, and they don't want to have to like rely on taking, fake hormones to like understand, or not even understanding, just like saying this is how it is, like this is just what everybody does, but like coming to want to know how their body works. Like there's a reason for all of this happening. And I kind of want to touch on like how a woman's body works and how a man's body works, and like why men should learn about NFP even though it's about women's health.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So much loaded in that question or in that comment. And I would absolutely agree that, I mean, the biggest difference between natural family planning and basically anything else that you would be doing is that natural family planning is a knowledge set and it's a skill set, right? It's not just a pill that you pop, right?
Mm-hmm.
So women and men actually get to understand so much about how our bodies work by investing in natural family planning instruction. So that, I mean, even that investment, I think we tend to not think about, right? But at the same time, like you are actually acquiring skills and knowledge through this that you can't get in anything else. So that's incredibly powerful. So where do you want me to start with kind of addressing some of those other things that you just talked about? What's one question to laser focus in first, and then I think maybe we'll snowball from there.
I don't know. Is there something that you wanted to learn more about or ask specifically about, like, guys?
Yeah, I guess I have a pet peeve with guys that let it just be the girl's problem.
Yeah.
So if we could touch on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, so this is, oh boy. All right. So why do we see it as like a woman's issue is partly because I think we wait really late in most cases to introduce the concept of natural family planning. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of people only hear about it, even within the Catholic Church, a lot of people only hear about it in the context of like marriage prep.
That was us. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's okay. So like at this time, I mean, I think I put myself like in those shoes and I say, okay, well, if you are hearing about this for the first time, you're like, I'm sorry, I am planning a wedding right now. I am just really overwhelmed by a lot of things. And now you're telling me that we have to take this class and we have to pick up this book and we have to do this, that, or the other. It feels so incredibly overwhelming that I think that both men and women kind of have this like mental receptivity of that, or like, okay, we just got to get it done. We got to learn the basics of how this works. And like, we got to get it done as quickly as possible. But there's not this broader conversation or this awareness of like, just how this is good to understand about our bodies in general. When we wait until marriage prep, it's all about the practical stuff, right? And so you dig in and you do the practical. And when you're engaged, it does seem kind of practical for the woman to just start observing things. And then the guy's just like, okay, great, honey. Like, we'll talk about it at the honeymoon. Like, I see that kind of happening a lot. And if that's the mentality of when you're learning, then that will carry through into your marriage. And so what I like to, I kind of have this dual approach. Number one, I think that we should really be introducing this concept much, 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 much sooner. That men and women should both understand how our bodies work a lot earlier in the game and have this kind of seed planted so that it's not a shock when we get to marriage prep, so that it's not overwhelming and we aren't in total survival mode when we're trying to learn. So that's number one. Number two, when I'm working with couples, I really encourage the couple to figure out how they want their charting to work. And I know that this is different for different methods. Like some methods have a philosophy of like, no, this is how you keep a joint chart, right? And they kind of teach that method. What I like to coach couples on is to say, well, you know your relationship. You know who loves to keep the data and interpret the data, right? You know kind of how you communicate, whether it makes sense for you to do this, that, or the other with your charts. And so at a minimum, men should be involved in the learning process because fertility is a shared reality. It's never an individual reality, right? Mm-hmm. And number two, have active conversations about how you would like to share the charting experience. There may be some things that men just simply cannot observe. Like, men are not going to be able to observe cervical secretions. It's just something that a woman needs to do on her own in the bathroom. But he can check a thermometer and he can check a monitor reading. And he can definitely learn how to work and interpret a chart. So these are all things that you can consider. But I really think, honestly, the biggest and most impactful role that men can have in the actual experience of natural family planning is to be the voice who reassures the woman that, like, she's not in control of what happens in her cycle, and that's okay. I think really, unfortunately, a lot of marriages struggle with NFP because the guy kind of thinks like, he puts the pressure on his wife to be like, okay, well, when are you ovulating? When's go time? When's this, that, and the other? And especially for women who may have irregular cycles or even just like the normal variations that happen in life, this is a huge amount of pressure because she can't control that. And so I think the husband's role is to be that voice who puts everything outside the perspective and says, you know what, honey, I know that you can't control this. The chart is its own thing, right? Our shared fertility is our shared fertility, and it's not your body that's dictating everything because you don't have control over that. So I think the husbands can give their wives a huge gift if they specifically tell their wives, like, I understand that you don't control this, and that's okay. And we will patiently wait together, get through this abstinence together, troubleshoot this thing together. That's a huge gift in any marriage. And I think regardless of how you split up the charting duties, if you can have that mentality, that's going to get you a lot farther with your NFP than if you're constantly butting heads and arguing about it.
Yeah, I agree. That's such a good point of like doing it together. And you are really, really good at that. Like you set out the little like monitor, and I have like a cup and the sticks like every night before like you go to bed, so that when I wake up in the morning, like it's there ready for me. And then like we're just always doing it together. Like you're a big part of it. It's never just like, okay, like that's just something she does. Like I don't know about any of it. Like you're always like, oh, what was the reading for today? Like that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I like emailing the NFP instructor because I'm like, what's going on here? Because we've had a crazy amount of like fluctuations in the cycles, and then like, okay, it was very normal, and then the wedding happened, and now it's like, this is not at all what I felt like we were taught. And like nothing's lining up. So it's been this crazy amount of like, okay, this is confusing. I don't know what's going on. And also super frustrating because it was normal for the 6 months of charting.
Of like all of prep, we were like, we got it. Like we understand all this.
You could basically predict exactly when everything would happen. And then the wedding happened, and then it was like, oh, you can't predict that anymore.
It went completely out the window.
Super crazy, which is why we're switching to the thermometer method, which I actually want to touch on the fact that they're starting to advertise NFP as non-hormonal birth control, which is a very interesting topic that I even brought up to my spiritual director. Like they are running ads for NFP but calling it birth control.
Yeah,
and
it's
I
like,
think it's genius.
They're selling it as this like new product, and it's really just the symptothermal method, but it works. And it's like a lot more people, even from a non-religious standpoint, want to like hop on the train of like ditching birth control and just like wanting to learn how their body works and not have to worry about like having to take that every day in order to like, I don't know, harness their fertility, I guess. So yeah, we're using, it's actually just shipped today. They had like a back order, but the Aura Ring, if you've heard of it, and I think it's called the Natural Cycles app, is what we're like starting to use now.
Yeah, and to land the plane on why we're actually even switching is because we're using Clear Blue, and the problem with that is that when you hit 19 tests, it automatically reads low.
I have a very long cycle, like obnoxiously long. So by the time it gets to like past the 10 tests and then it cycles to another 10, I still haven't even like read high yet. And so it's like, okay, should we reset the monitor? Like, am I going to miss it if I reset it? It's just a mess. But like, and if you have a normal cycle with regular length, that's probably like what would have worked throughout our whole like,
yeah, the biggest problem is that sometimes it will hit before the like 19, so we don't know when to reset it, because like we're supposed to be testing after a certain number of days, and then it's like sometimes it will hit, sometimes it won't. So now we're in this like, oh boy, and then there's like that buffer period where you reset the monitor and it takes like a day or two to actually start going again. So it's like, so we're gonna try that.
I hear you guys. And I'm doing everything to hold myself back and be like, do not coach them right now. We can have a side conversation. Yeah, that's so frustrating. And this is where I think, honestly, this is where I think that where popular culture is like jumping on what like the non-hormonal birth control train, right? Unfortunately, they have a lot more money than we do, right? Like these companies and all of these organizations that are like the femtech industry, as we call it, right? Or the fertility tech industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And so they're going to have people that are like, okay, if we can see this like niche market, we're going to hop on it. And so in the last few years, we've seen Aura coming out and Natural Cycles getting FDA clearance, and we have like different monitors. There's the Mira monitor, there's the Aneto monitor, there's all sorts of other devices in development right now and in production. So I kind of want to say, well, I have a lot to say about that. But number one, I think it's going to be really interesting to see in the next few years which of these devices can really be studied for efficacy, because it's not quite there yet. So which of these devices can really be studied for robust efficacy with a natural family planning method? And, could there be new natural family planning methods that are like church approved that would use this new tech? That is exciting to me. I think that that's a great opportunity to make this more accessible and appealing to people, and to show that it's like that the church isn't just backwards in teaching all of this, but like we can use this advanced technology and it's great. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I do want to just caution, like a general caution, is that it's very easy for us to get excited about a lot of this tech. But at this point, what we've been seeing with natural family planning and with kind of, I don't know, is it wisdom that the church has gained over these few decades of being kind of the leader in NFP? I don't know. But a lot of devices are over-promising. A lot of devices are basically saying that they can be a method. And unfortunately, what we talked about earlier about that component of NFP actually being like knowledge-based and giving you a skill set, I'm really, really cautious of any device which wants to strip away the knowledge or the skill. And so what I would just say to anybody who's thinking about investing in these devices, it's like, I know some people that hate the Clearblue because of that 19 tests, and I'm right with you on that. It's not great for everybody. And so they'll switch to Mira or something else. But just if you're thinking about doing that, number one, have a conversation with your instructor and see if that makes sense to invest, because a lot of these are pricey. And number two, make sure that you have an understanding that you're going to still need to know a method. Because, for example, something like Natural Cycles is going to try to be totally predictive, and it's going to give you interpretations and tell you when your fertile window is. Mm-hmm. But especially if you have irregular cycles, it's not studied for efficacy for you, and it can be wrong. It can be very wrong. And so making sure that you understand, like, if I see this on my Natural Cycles app, I'm gonna flag this with a red flag because I think the interpretive component is wrong. That's a smart way to use the tech, right? Yeah. To understand a method that would be able to help you kind of override any of the inclinations that these gadgets have to strip away your autonomy with interpreting your chart. Mm-hmm. So that's what I would just tell people, is that like tech is fascinating and really interesting and exciting, but we just need to make sure that we're not eliminating that aspect of knowledge and skill, because that's really where the robustness of an NFP method is going to come in, is if you as the user understand how to interpret the data and are equipped to facilitate the interpretation with your own chart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could definitely see that, because the Natural Cycles app is like so sleek and simple, and like they make it so that like anyone can understand it. And so with the Aura, I haven't gotten it yet, so I can't like exactly say, but it takes your temperature in the morning, like with the ring on. And so to understand like, oh, this is why the temperature works, rather than just the Natural Cycles saying like you're fertile or you're not fertile today, like understanding that portion rather than just like going religiously by what the app is saying.
Yeah.
can we get into what led you to like become an NFP instructor and like just wanting to get into this whole world?
Well, basically having a horrible experience with natural family planning was what led me to be an instructor. So I guess, so I learned about natural family planning when I was in college. So I was exposed to the concept and I was like, oh, this is brand new. And I'm cradle Catholic, right? Like, and I think that my parents even used a form of natural family planning for a while, but like, I don't know, because we don't talk about it. And it was never really taught. So I found out about it in college and I was like, oh yeah, I think this is really attractive to me. But I'm the sort of person where I was like, well, I'll just learn it on my own. Like I'll internet research it and I'll figure it out, right? I'm smart enough, whatever. And so in our marriage prep, I didn't start charting until I was engaged. And so I learned online, self-taught, didn't get an instructor. And I had a friend who was also engaged. And so we would sit like on our bedroom floor and like compare charts in the months leading up to our weddings. And we're just doing this thing. And we're comparing notes about like, oh, is this how you interpret a temp shift? Or is this, I don't know. I forget. I think it's this. So you could tell it wasn't very clearly thought out there. When I got married, we decided that we were going to start our family pretty much right away. So I got pregnant and then I went into postpartum after that. So like I barely had any time to use my knowledge of NFP in regular cycles before all of a sudden I'm postpartum. And now things are crazy town. Like my cycle's not back yet. How can I tell if I'm fertile? When my cycles came back, they were really irregular, which is normal. How do I deal with this? I was a basket case, you guys. Like it was so hard on our marriage. And I was so hormonal and I was just like, this is awful. Why would we do this? So when after I had my second baby, so somehow we got through that first postpartum experience and we survived to the second baby. And I told my husband, I was like, I desperately need to find an instructor. This is just not going to work. And unfortunately, like my pastor had no idea. I asked him, I was like, hey, how do I learn this? And he was like, I don't know. Nobody's ever asked. I was like, welcome to Boston. And I searched and couldn't find anybody who would be willing to take me for a long time. And then I finally found somebody and I was like, this is an investment. Like, I don't know that we can afford this, but I really need to do it. And it was just night and day different, right? Like having somebody to walk you through things, having somebody to help you troubleshoot, to tell you you're not crazy, to teach you why things are happening. Like it was such a gift. And so when we were working together, she at one point said, we're running an instructor training if you'd be interested. And I was like, yes, like we need more people who can do this work because like, I don't know how my husband and I are fine, but like it was a real trial, and it was such a gift to our marriage and to our family life to have somebody to help out. So that's kind of how I got into it. And there were all sorts of side conversations with doctors along the way. And but it really was through just really struggling and seeing what a difference it could make to have somebody walk with you when I was like, what, I want to be a part of this. Like I want to be somebody who can help out. And so that's kind of how I got into it initially. And it was a very small side gig for a long time. And now it's pretty much all I do. So
oh my gosh, that's really funny. I mean, not funny that you went through that, but like,
well, it is kind of funny. Like looking back, it's like, what? Oh man, Christina, like.
Oh my gosh. What are some things that you have learned from your clients about like the struggles, like women navigating like healthcare in general?
Oh gosh. Well, yeah, I mean, I distinctly remember the first couple clients I had after I got trained were very interesting. They live in my mind. One of them was actually a nurse, and I was teaching her. And at one point, we're just going through the first session where I'm like explaining, the different hormones in the menstrual cycle and how they line up and the different phases and trying to understand these things. And she just broke down in tears. And I thought that I had done something really wrong. I was like, that's it. I'm officially like the worst NFP instructor in the entire world. Like, she's crying. I don't know what to do. And I said, I'm really sorry. Do you need to take a minute? Kind of like resetting here. And she goes, oh, Christina, I'm not upset at you. She's like, I am a nurse and I'm hearing this information about my body for the very first time from you. And right now I'm just really overwhelmed and angry. And I feel very betrayed by my profession. And I was like, oh, this is rather interesting. And so I think the lack of knowledge that doctors, that nurses have about women's cycles, like even at a basic level, is a huge problem. And so when women go to their doctors and their doctors kind of brush them off about things, I think a lot of times it's not that your doctor is just trying to be hostile. It's just that this is actually a big gap in your doctor's knowledge. And your doctor literally does not know how to deal with what you're asking them right now. And so this can cause a lot of issues if we try to go to the doctor and we're like, hey, can we do something other than birth control? They literally don't know what else to suggest. And so my second client that comes to mind is a woman who went to her doctor and was trying to explain to her doctor that she was bleeding kind of regularly, but we knew from her chart that she wasn't ovulating. These were anovulatory bleeds. And her doctor was like, well, if you're having periods, you're ovulating. And she's like, well, I know, but I'm trying to tell you that I'm not having a period. Like, it's an anovulatory bleed. And the doctor was like, no, if you're bleeding, it's a period, and therefore you're ovulating. And I was just like, wait, at what point did the doctor pick up this random tidbit of information that like every single bleed is a period? It's just not true. So again, knowledge gaps, but then just like the dismissive behavior that doctors can have. Like, this doctor basically just shuffled her out and it was like, you're crazy. You're not making any sense. I know better than you do, and didn't get her any help. And so she called me on the phone crying. She was like, Christina, I have no support. Like, so just knowledge gaps. And I see that this is not just something that's local to Boston. It's something that doctors everywhere are prone to. And so I think that this can lead to just not getting the help that we need, but also just really feeling like we're dismissed. Like really feeling like doctors will tell us that we're dumb, that we're backwards. I had a doctor offer to call, basically to think that I was in an abusive relationship because I was using NFP, right? Like that they think that this is some like machismo thing that men force women to do. I have no idea. It's very strange.
That makes absolutely no sense.
I know. But like they saw NFP on my chart and they were like, do you need to talk to like a social worker? And I was like, no, what are you talking about? Like what? So it's strange. And I would say to any woman who feels dismissed or who feels belittled, number one, I'm very sorry. It's probably likely that your doctor didn't mean to do this to you. It's just that they didn't learn any better. And number two, if your doctor ever does that to you, you deserve other help. So My Catholic Doctor is a fantastic place to look and see if there are physicians that can offer telehealth services to you. NAPRO is kind of the medical arm of Creighton. If you are a Creighton user, you can try to find a NAPRO trained doctor. Anybody who takes a restorative, reproductive medical approach is going to be much better equipped to handle your questions and your concerns in a way that's in harmony with your desire to use a natural family planning method.
Yeah, I mean, I experienced the same thing, like not exactly the same thing, but I had to go to the gynecologist. I mean, I got married at 20 and 19 is like when I like was introduced to the gynecologist. And so it was basically just like a, hi, nice to meet you. Like, you're going to be my gynecologist kind of appointment. Like, she didn't do anything, but I'm explaining to her, like, I'm getting married in July and we're going to be using NFP. I've never had sex before. And she's looking at me like I'm absolutely crazy. Like, are you sure you're going to be compatible? Like, I was just like, are you serious right now? Like, you're not asking me this question. And just like having to explain to her, like, I'm going to be using NFP. This is how it works. Like, I was just like stunned. I was like, okay, like that's all I need to see. Like, I'm going to go find somebody else. It was just like, I should not be having to explain what NFP is to my gynecologist when she's just like, oh yeah, so like we have like, the pill, or there's, what is it called? The little IUD thing. Like, I saw that in her office. I was like, you know what, this is just not a good fit. And so like I found another like practice that does a restorative health, and like they're an hour away, but for me it's totally worth it to go there instead of just like maybe a 5-minute drive down the road. So yeah, definitely have experienced that before.
Well, and I would say this too, Dom, and you were asking, like about going back to this conversation about like the man's role and why people sometimes see this as a woman's thing, is because like, the men don't have to deal with this in their doctor's offices. Like, what man, right, is getting grilled about his family planning choices, right? What man is being told by his physician that like, you can't use natural family planning, like here's a bag full of condoms, like it's irresponsible for you, or this, that, or the other. And men don't have to drive an hour out of their way to get the health care that we deserve, right? And so I think to a lot of women who feel like maybe, or couples who feel like NFP is like a woman's burden, I think that there's a real weightiness to that we as a church need to speak to. And I think that there's great organizations like My Catholic Doctor or Facts or Natural Womanhood that are trying to fill in this gap. But we're just not there yet. And so just the choice to use NFP outside of the actual practice of NFP and the charting and the interpretation, even that choice, and every single time you have to go into the doctor's office having to explain it or having to justify it or having to write off your doctor or having to deal with like the dismissal and just the verbal put downs, like that's a burden for women. It really, really is. And so we have to name that. We have to acknowledge that and understand that that's part and parcel of our whole experience of NFP is the woman having to deal with this in her doctor's office. And so I guess what I would also kind of expand upon is that like men being understanding and being willing to help facilitate their wife finding the right doctor, getting the care she needs. Don't tell her that she's not allowed to drive 2 hours away to get the care that she wants. Like I have to drive 2 hours. And my husband's like, okay, I'll watch the kids. Like, because at that point, like it's a whole day gone,
Mm-hmm.
So Dom, I would say too, that like for men being able to be willing to like facilitate that for their wives is again, like a huge gift, because it really is an uneven yoke in some respects.
You were so supportive of like that decision. Like I went home and I was like, you were never going to guess what just freaking happened. He was like, yeah, that's not working. Let's find you something else. And immediately was just on board with it, which was just, it just made things so much easier. And like, I don't know what the word is. Like, it made me really, really secure in my decision to be like, this is what we're going to do. Like, we're just really going for it. Even though everybody's telling us like we're absolutely crazy,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, women take the brunt of it for sure, because I mean they're experiencing it at the doctors and yeah, just everyday life, and it's like it's your, like you got the parts that are doing the thing type of thing. I've only really gotten just like those weird, dirty looks or offhand comments about that's weird that you're doing that, but okay. Type of thing.
Or the like, we'll see your 12 kids. Like,
oh yeah. That's my favorite is the massive family that you're definitely going to have because there's no way to avoid pregnancy without contraception.
Mm-hmm.
Which I mean, I thought the same thing. I was like, man, I'm looking at this sins list and it's like a examination of conscience, and I'm like, what is this? They were using some sort of wording, and I was like, could you explain that a little bit more? And then the priest told me, and I'm like, oh. And so then now I'm going down the spiral of like, okay, well, how do Catholic families plan or do they just not? Like, is that why they have a ton of kids? But it's not the case. It's just that normally if you like respect the way that things are going and love kids and are open to life, then typically you have more kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think one part of the conversation that we haven't really touched on yet that I would say in the majority of cases is a harder burden for the man is the prolonged abstinence component. I say in the majority of cases, not in all, because obviously like both men and women can have trouble abstaining. That's perfectly normal. But I do think that sometimes men feel that more acutely. And I think, unfortunately, in the church, there's this kind of cynicism about men's ability to be chaste within a marriage relationship. I don't know if you've encountered this, but this is like a weird aspect of NFP that I've seen, that some people just claim that like, well, we just can't expect people to control themselves and therefore it's just not going to work. And I'm like, whoa, do we just not have an understanding of virtue? Have we sunk so low that we really think that people are not capable of cultivating this beautiful, rich virtue in the context of marriage? So I also just want to throw out that caution that there's a lot of people who think that like, this is unrealistic. This is impossible. And I'm like, okay, I'm sorry, but like holiness is demanding in many ways outside of chastity, right? Why would we expect that a husband and wife can't cultivate and develop this virtue together? I would think that they definitely can. And what a beautiful gift if they can. I don't think that we're slaves to our base desires that way. So I would say if anybody thinks that like NFP is just unrealistic in that respect, like, yeah, it's hard, but virtue is hard. Holiness is hard. But but the thing is like through grace, it's achievable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think even maybe it was less of a problem a few generations ago, but now everything's so quick and I want it now, this type of like, and then also just contraception, putting that in your mind that you can have sex on demand whenever you want with just the pleasure and none of the other things that come along with it. I think that definitely affects the idea of like, this is impossible. I can't do this. I just don't know how to, I can't control myself. It's too much of an urge to indulge in those practices. But on the other hand, the men are doing, a lot of them are doing a lot of bare minimum, just like kind of knowing what the cycles are about and how to track them and all these things, versus if you really dive in, you know what's going on. You can have a much greater respect for the way that your wife's body works and the way that you're trying to navigate this abstinence and balance, like the difficulties of abstaining and when should we have kids, when should we not type of thing. And so, yeah, I don't know. I guess I feel like to any of the guys, they should be more involved. And if they think they're involved a lot, they should step forward a little bit more.
I love that. Yeah, that's great, Tom.
I wanted to touch on, I have the good news about sex and marriage right here. And there was a chapter, I like bookmarked it. It is called, I think it's chapter 6. Oh, thank you. It's hard to do it with one hand. Yeah, I do not. And it's all about contraception. And so there was a couple questions. If you don't understand like the format of the book, there's like questions and answers. So some of the questions that I wanted to get your answer on was, has the Catholic Church lost touch when it comes to birth control because no other church teaches that birth control is wrong?
Ew.
That's spicy.
A little spicy. And honestly, like, it's been a long time since I've read this book. So this is a book by Christopher West. It's a great book. It's been a long time since I've read it. I think honestly, like if you just take a look at where society is right now, what you were talking about earlier with like the natural cycles and with all of this other, like the non-hormonal birth control, this is clearly a sign that the church has been preserving something that the world is hungry for right now. And I think to say that the church is backwards in the teaching on birth control is very narrowly focused. Because at one little blip in time, when we're kind of obsessed with this idea of birth control and sex on demand, that like maybe the church seemed like, oh, they're the only holdout, right? Which is actually still not true. And anyway, but if you simply just look at the research and the time that the church put into understanding how these different methods could be developed, and then where society is taking these to the next level, right? With all of the tech and with all this other stuff, like I think it's very clear that the church was preserving something that society was very quick to abandon. And I think that that's a great gift potentially to, the future of the church and the future of the world, that the church was actually nurturing something which society had yet to see the value in.
Absolutely. And I want to just read this quote real quick. It says that if the church is wrong about this issue, I would agree. She's out of touch and loses all credibility right there. But if the church is right about contraception, then it's the rest of the world that's out of touch, and the Catholic Church gains all credibility. That one's like, I don't know, what do you call that, dog-eared or whatever? Like, that was one of my favorite things that book has said, because it's like, we are standing firm on this foundation and this teaching. And since it's like one of the only that teaches that, either it's totally wrong or it's 100% right and everybody else is crazy. So I think that's kind of just what the Catholic Church is all about in general. So it's like a nice boom.
Well, and I think it's too, what I like to kind of draw people's attention to is that like the church's teaching on artificial contraception, or I shouldn't even say artificial contraception, the church's teaching on contraception in general is not just like formed in a vacuum, right? It's not all of us, like, it's not as if like there have never, ever, ever in the history of the world been contraceptive or barrier devices. And that like all of a sudden in the 1950s and 60s, we had to just like come to some random conclusion, right? Out of nowhere. Like there have always been methods where people are trying to prevent pregnancy. There have always been methods where people are, abandoning their children and trying to, killing their children, right? As a result of like having an unwanted pregnancy. That has always been with us, and the church has always stood firm on that, right? And so the teaching is rooted not just in what we have inherited as like a firm, consistent teaching on these issues, but also you can look and you can see how it's coherent with our understanding of what is the dignity of the body. And I think that that's really what's to open a whole other can of worms. Like I think that's what's missing in society today. We do not understand the dignity and the integrity of the person. The integrity meaning the whole person, body and soul, and how important this is to understanding the person as a creature. The church has this, what JP2 calls the theological or the Christological anthropology, this understanding of the human person, by which we cannot separate out the natural functions of the body from the person themselves. And so I even think making sure that we contextualize our understanding of the church's teaching on this one issue in the broader understanding of what a human person is, the dignity of the body, the reality of the resurrection, which is promised to us, and the integrity of the body to the human person, right? And then the teaching on marriage and what marriage is for as a sacrament. Like it's wrapped up in all of these things. It's not a standalone issue that you can say, okay, I'll take some of these things and just not that one, because they are connected.
Going off the point that the church has always been teaching this, and throughout the centuries of humanity, that people have always been trying to get rid of kids or take parts from certain things and not want the rest of it. It's in Genesis. In Genesis 38, the story of Onan, he and there was other people, they say like, oh, the reason he was killed was just because he was doing this sort of sin or breaking this sort of law. And other people were doing that. The one thing that he did that was different from all those other people is that Onan was spilling his seed on the ground so that he would not get the girl pregnant.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So,
Yeah, so we think about onanism, right? A lot of people talk about onanism as if it were masturbation, but really it was coitus interruptus. It was pull-out method. That's what onan was doing. Yep.
Yeah. This, yeah. No. It's all good.
I like it.
Yeah, it's all good. And this is another like really like hot button topic, but I definitely want to get into it, is how can the church, this is another question from the Good News About Sex and Marriage, how can the church not recognize the contradiction being against contraception and abortion?
So, okay, so you mean so if people like are against abortion but not against contraception, that there's an internal contradiction there? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, if like
no, how could they be against both?
Yeah, because it's like if I get pregnant and like I don't want a baby, that kind of thing.
I see. Okay, so this is a charge that a lot of people make, that if we don't like abortion, we need to invest in contraception because that's how we prevent unwanted pregnancies in the first place, right? Okay, well, so even statistically, you can look at this and you can see, depending on how you want to interpret the statistics, right? Planned Parenthood will claim that yes, access to contraception decreases the number of unwanted pregnancies and therefore decreases the number of abortions. Other places have looked at similar statistics and said, no, actually, access to contraception increases the number of unwanted pregnancies because more people are then having sex. And then when they do get pregnant because the birth control fails, they will seek out an abortion as a backup method. So it gets very muddy to go into those waters, but there's definitely a pull there where we can look at the numbers and we can see that. But I think, again, this goes back to what I was just saying about, the church has an understanding of the human person that does not allow us to shut off a healthy, functioning reproductive system for the sake of, avoiding pregnancy. That it's not inconsistent for the church to say, we believe that every person is made in the image and likeness of God and therefore deserves life. And to also say, we believe that every person is made in the image and likeness of God and therefore deserves to have their body respected and kept intact. Mm-hmm. I think the same premise applies in both of those things.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I agree. Do you consider contraception to be a form of abortion?
A form of abortion? Only if it's an abortifacient contraceptive. I think that we don't need to call contraceptives abortifacients falsely in order for them to be bad. I think that's creating a false premise. But there is, so for example, something like the copper IUD is much more likely. Like if I've had clients who are charting with the copper IUD because it can take months. Like you have to get on a waiting list sometimes to get these things removed. And so when you make the decision to get rid of it, you can be waiting for a while. And so I've worked with clients who are in that waiting period, and they're able to identify ovulation. They've been ovulating the entire time. It's just that the copper IUD works differently. And so, for example, like if you're ovulating, there's a chance of pregnancy. There's a chance of conception, right? And one of the ways that some methods of contraception can work is that if that initial action of suppressing ovulation fails, there will be backup options that can kind of essentially cause a miscarriage and can cause, what you would call, in other terms, like a spontaneous abortion, right? Because your body just rejects the pregnancy, isn't able to complete the process of implantation.
Yeah, that's specifically the one that I was referencing is the copper IUD. That's just so sad. Another question, this isn't from the book, but just some that people have asked me, I need to take the pill for medical reasons, or I need to use contraception because it would be dangerous for me to get pregnant. I physically, I can't get pregnant. This is the only way. NFP just will not work for me no matter what. Like, no matter all the evidence you like give them, they're just like, I can't do it. It's not for me. Might be for you, not for me. And like, that's that.
Oh gosh. Okay. So I'll take the first one. The first one was, I need to take birth control for medical reasons. Okay. This is a very common issue that we deal with in medical ethics. It's a principle known as the principle of double effect, and within the bounds of certain criteria, it can be fine to take, specifically hormonal contraceptives as, medical therapies. Because as we talked about before, like sometimes synthetic hormones can actually be something used for symptom alleviation when there are no better options. Now, should we develop better options? Yeah, we should. And in many cases, could we achieve similar effects, kind of restorative effects with maybe bioidentical hormones or a different approach? Yeah. Are those techniques always available and feasible as options for women? No. And so until we get there, we're going to be struggling with this concept of like, okay, well, this is the best thing we have right now. If that's really the only option that I have access to, and I meet all of these other criteria for double effect, meaning that I do not intend to use this for contraception. I am intending to use it to alleviate symptoms of migraines or something that are otherwise debilitating, right? The principle of double effect can apply, and Catholic moral theologians have basically established that the requirement of proportionality exists in that case for double effect. Done. Okay. The other one is harder to approach because there's a real pastoral element there of women who feel in some cases betrayed by the church because they faithfully used natural family planning for a while and did get pregnant and really, really have a serious need to postpone pregnancy right now, and they feel like the church has not supported them in finding a method that works or is putting undue financial pressure on them to try a new method or something like that, right? So I want to be very careful in addressing that question. There's no blanket response that you can give to somebody who is hurting. But at the same time, you can just point to the fact that all contraception has what you would call a failure rate, right? Meaning that is not 100%, is not foolproof. And in many cases, if you have a very, very serious need to postpone pregnancy, it is far better for you to actually understand how your body works and to have a little bit more control over understanding where fertility is than simply blindly trusting a pill or a patch or some other method to do that for you. The efficacy of natural family planning can rival a lot of these things. It's challenging, right? And you may need to try a lot of different methods before you find something that works. And you may never find something that you feel like you totally trust completely, and that's hard. But that doesn't mean that you have permission to abandon the moral teaching of the church. And so that's hard. That's very hard in those situations. But I would also say that this is not an area where it's unique for the church to kind of say, yeah, but no, we don't do this, right? Even if it's really hard, we have to stand firm on something. Natural family planning is not the only area of church teaching where that sort of stance is merited. And in that case, it really is about obedience to the guidance of the Holy Spirit and the magisterium of the church, and understanding like there's a reason for this, and I'm going to try and follow it. And maybe that's a point where the church needs to step up and help those couples and give them money to invest in a new instructor, give them money to invest in a new monitoring device, and help them out, rather than just say, okay, you figure it out. That's where I have trouble, is if people say, like, I've tried something, and then the church is not in a position to follow through and to be like, well, can I help you? And that's our role. That is our role. That's not, the bishops aren't going to do that, right? That's the role of the laity to help each other. So, okay, that's a different soapbox. But I just want to plant that we desperately need to be helping each other and stepping up in this area. And that's the whole reason that Pearl and Thistle exists, is because I think that there's areas where we've told people this is the thing that we need to do. And then we've just left them to their own devices. And that's really, really hard.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. That hits very close to home for me. Another question would be, we've been using contraception for years and we've never heard about this stuff. What should we do?
Yeah, that's pretty common, actually, right? Because maybe you heard about it in marriage prep, but some people don't even really hear about it then.
Yeah, I mean, in our pre-Cana, for example, it was like very, very brushed over. Like, we had done some research on it, so like maybe like that's the first thing that they hear about NFP. Like, it didn't seem that important. Like, it was just a small part of the day. And so I was like, that's all they talked about? Like, that was what people got on NFP? And I was just like, if we hadn't researched it, we would have probably just blanketed over it ourselves. So, I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I bet. And I think your experience is not unique in that. Oh, yeah. Okay. So if you're finding yourself at this point kind of convicted that like, oh, I should like learn more about this. I mean, the first thing is, definitely go to, the thing is, find a method. Sorry, I'm stumbling over my words because I'm like, wow, this is a big thing. See if you can find somebody in your parish or find somebody online or find somebody to talk to who can actually point you in the right direction. I think it's really hard to just be like, okay, Google everything. Or like, that doesn't work. Okay. So if you're feeling convicted that you want to learn more about this, okay, you can go to Pearl and Thistle. I have a video series where I'll give you an overview of like church teaching on NFP and kind of the biomarkers and the different methods. Like you can go there. You can look online, right? There are some free videos which can give you an overview of different methods. So the steps would be to kind of do a baseline sort of search into like, okay, well, what sort of method might I be interested in learning? Reach out to an instructor, have a consult with them, and then they can walk you through the next steps in terms of getting started. And I would say, don't wait to find the perfect method. I think that sometimes people are like, there's a lot of different options, and it's on me to like do all of my research before I commit to anything. And I think that's not true. I think that a lot of methods could be potentially good for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And as you guys have found, like sometimes you need to use a method for a while in order to realize that it may not be a great fit. So don't put pressure on yourself to like find the perfect method before you even jump in. You just got to get started, right? Mm-hmm. So I'd say that. So figure out what sort of method you might want to do, connect with an instructor and just and get going. And they can walk you through a lot of that transition time. It really is a big time of mental shifts, of, changing up some of your scheduling, some of your planning, rethinking how your day is shaped around, like waking up to take your temperature or something. Like there's a lot of transitions that happen during that time. And so especially during this time, working with somebody who's trained to help coach you through that it can be really, really important in terms of your long-term ability to stick with something and to feel supported.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. This all seems so complicated to somebody that's never heard of it before. They're like, I've been married for 10 years. Yeah, it's like, for somebody that's like, I've been married for 10 years. This is the first time I've heard about it. Like, how do I even start?
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing I will tell people is also like give yourself grace, right? That like if you have suddenly come to the understanding that like, oh my gosh, like I've been living in sin for the last 10 years, like I'm sorry. No, if you were ignorant about this because people like withheld information from you or you just weren't in a position to hear it, like allow yourself to receive God's grace and that forgiveness in that moment. Do not burden yourself. Do not saddle yourself with guilt about that. Make a firm commitment to move forward. And so let's see, where would I specifically direct somebody to go? Go to pearlandthistle.com and check out my couples tab, right, where you can get information. Go to Natural Womanhood and start just reading up on some of these things. They're a great place to learn about a lot of the health benefits of doing something like cycle charting. And you can pick up a lot of information there about different method types and kind of get connected and get like get yourself exposed to some of the weird language that's involved in learning natural family planning stuff. They're another fabulous resource. So I would definitely point you towards them. And then also the USCCB has a natural family planning page as well, where you can look at kind of USCCB approved methods. You could read more church documents. They have plenty of brochures and free materials there as well. And if possible, check your diocesan website and see if they have recommendations for diocesan instructors. You're not always going to find NFP on your parish website, but usually a diocese will have something, and you can connect with your diocesan coordinator and get plugged in on any local resources or advice or materials that they may have too.
Mm-hmm. When is the ideal time to start learning about NFP? Before, maybe a little before 10 years into marriage?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, okay. So here's where I can kind of give a pitch for like where my heart is and how I've kind of structured my work at Pearl and Thistle. I believe, natural family planning, meaning the application of knowledge about fertility for the purpose of family planning, right? That properly belongs in the context of actively planning for marriage and for planning for a family. Like, I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with NFP being something that couples learn in the context of marriage preparation, whether that's proximate or if it's a little remote. What I think, however, is that the basics of understanding our bodies and the basics of cycle charting and understanding how looking for ovulation in a woman's cycle can be a crucial vital sign of health, that needs to start much, much sooner. Like, natural family planning is an application for a specific knowledge and skill set. I think we can be learning that knowledge and gaining those skills a lot sooner. So Pearl and Thistle is set up so that, so I have a first period course called Cycle Prep. And in that course, I teach girls about the whole menstrual cycle. And then we talk about periods, right? Because that's what they're going to be preparing for. But I teach them all about estrogen and progesterone and FSH and LSH or LH and the different, the follicular phase and the luteal phase of the cycle and all of the invisible work that your body does around ovulation, which culminates in this visible thing of a period bleed. But I give them the understanding of like, this is the whole story of the menstrual cycle. So they understand that from the very beginning. And then once they start their cycles, I invite girls to learn how to chart their cycles under specific recommendations for teens who may be a lot more irregular, right? Who may have a lot more anovulatory bleeds, and that's okay. We learn to just track the patterns of our cycles to know where we are in our cycles and to know if our cycles are overall healthy, right? We don't introduce the concept of fertility yet because that's not applicable. So I have this kind of stepwise learning model that I would love for more of us to at least consider as an option. I don't think that everybody needs to be charting their cycles when they're 14, but I think that for some girls, it can make a really big difference, especially if you have some kind of medical issues that are involved. And so I would love to see us thinking a little more strategically about building body literacy, right, to the culmination of natural family planning in the proximate preparation for marriage, but helping girls and boys become literate in learning to like read the signs of our body. And we know that literacy takes time. It can't just be learned overnight, right? You have to start first with letters and then sounds and then sentences, right? Words, right? Sentences, you go from there. So what I like to say is that like the problem that we have in the church with NFP is that we start with Shakespeare. We just plop Shakespeare in everybody's laps and they're like, here, you're literate, right? No, we got to start a lot sooner. We have to start with Dr. Seuss. And then we can get to Shakespeare. So that's kind of the trajectory of the work that I do and the vision that I would have for a better model.
Yeah, and that's so powerful because I love the fact that you're talking about body literacy and truly understanding how the body works. I remember, I actually don't really remember what they talked about they call it like sex ed. I just remember it was TPP. So I just remember it as toilet paper party, and I have no idea what it actually stood for. But they just talked about, they brought in like guest speakers, which were people that got pregnant when they were in their teens. and they were telling these, it was all 7th and 8th graders. They were telling them that you need to use some sort of birth control or condoms or whatever so that you don't end up like me. And I was like, well, this is an odd experience to be sitting in here. But they focused nothing on how does the body work, and only focused on here's these things that you can kind of swerve how the body works. And you're also an author. You have a new book out called The Language of Your Body, Embracing God's Design for Your Cycle. Where can people find that, get that?
Yeah, I'm very excited. So tentatively, the actual release date is April 8th. So it's available for pre-order right now. So it's published through our Sunday Visitor, OSV. So if you go to the OSV Catholic bookstore online, you can find it for order available now. It's also on Amazon. And it really does touch on exactly what we were just kind of leading up to, which is this concept of body literacy, that God has designed our bodies in a very intimate and intentional way to be his images on the earth. And it's a kind of pondering of like, how would our notion of woman be improved, be deepened, if we seriously consider our menstrual cycle as a part of the way that our body speaks the love language of God. We don't give ourselves permission to think about that a lot, because for us women, a lot of times we just think about it as a curse. We think about it as something that's just like a really unfortunate part of being a woman, and we hate it, and we don't allow ourselves to think about, well, wait a minute. If God designed this special function of our bodies, what is this function of our bodies actually telling us about God himself? So that's what the book is about, the language of your body.
Awesome. Yeah, and we'll make sure we link it all in the notes below. And then what about your Instagram? How do they find you on Instagram and social media?
Yeah, so Pearl and Thistle, just all spelled out. Pearlandthistle.com, at Pearl and Thistle on Instagram. I have a Facebook page by the same name. Not on TikTok. Maybe someday. Let's try and make it easy. Pearl and Thistle.
Are you good?
Yeah. No, I love the conversation. I think there's so many people that they just don't know about it. And that's really, really sad and unfortunate, because it is so important, especially as a young girl and growing up to be a woman, and you're getting ready for marriage. It shouldn't just be plopped on you last minute. There's so many things that I'm just oh, I wish that this was a thing when I was young, but yeah, I hope that this will help a lot of people and just get the word out about it.
Thank you guys so much for having this conversation. I agree. It's something that we just don't talk about nearly enough. I mean, I live in a world where people are just obsessed with fertility awareness and natural family planning and cycle syncing and all this kind of stuff. And it's just kind of the air that you breathe. But you step outside that little bubble and you realize that there's a whole huge amount of people in the population that have never heard this before. And we need to do a better job as a church. And you guys, I mean, that's what you're doing, right? Is opening up these conversations, being this part of the church that will get this information to people. So I want to thank you for inviting me to have this conversation.
Of course. Thank you.